What if the most important creature in the universe was something you couldn't even look in the eye? It's a creature that moves under the sand, senses vibrations, and swallows anything in its path. The sandworms, known to the Fremen as Shai-Hulud, are not just giant monsters. They are part of the planet itself. They shape its landscape, its ecology, and its religion. And without them, there would be no spice. In this video, we're going to explore what the sandworms really are. How they're born, how they live, how they die, why the Fremen worship them, and why the rest of the galaxy fears them. Let's break down the biology, the symbolism, and the brutal reality of the most sacred and terrifying creature in Dune. Understanding the sandworms of Arrakis means starting from the beginning, not with the towering titans that tear through spice harvesters, but with something far smaller, stranger, and more mysterious. Before the worm, there is the Sandtrout. These creatures, almost unknown to most inhabitants of the Imperium, are the silent engineers of the desert. Shaped like flat, leathery discs, they live just beneath the surface of the sands. They're not aggressive, not majestic. They're barely even noticeable. But together, they are responsible for the creation of the harshest ecosystem in the known universe, and the only one capable of producing spice. Sandtrouts seek out water, not to drink it, but to encapsulate it, to absorb and lock it away from the surface world. When enough sandtrout spread across an area, they form a living seal, a biological membrane that prevents moisture from rising to the surface. Over time, these zones become hyperarid. Deserts form, and beneath them, pressure builds. In the heart of these sealed pockets, fermentation begins. Biological, chemical, and geologic processes combine. Sometimes the pressure triggers an explosion, known to the Fremen as a pre-spice mass eruption. It's dangerous, unpredictable, and essential. What follows is the formation of pure spice melange, the only source in the galaxy. But not every sandtrout survives this process. Some of them begin to fuse, slowly, silently. It's not clear if this is evolution, mutation, or something else entirely. But at some point, many sandtrout merge into a single organism. They lose their individuality and form what the Fremen call a little maker. It's not yet the worm, not fully, but it's the beginning. The creature continues to grow, protected by the dry, sealed desert it helped to create. It feeds on the pre-spice residue. It adapts to motion. It develops a sensitivity to vibration. And as it matures, its body stretches, thickens, hardens. It begins to move, and then it becomes the sandworm. At first, the young worm is only a few meters long, still dangerous, but not yet unstoppable. It will consume organic material, devour moisture, and move constantly to avoid the death of drowning. For the worms, water is not life, it is death. Just a few drops can corrode the delicate tissues inside a worm's gullet. This is why no worm can survive in a non-arid climate. This is why Arrakis is perfect. As the worm ages, it grows. Always. Constantly. There is no natural limit to its size except space and time. Some of the largest worms recorded by the Fremen reach over 400 meters in length. And once they reach that scale, they are all but invincible. Their hides are impenetrable to conventional weapons. Their movement shakes the ground like an earthquake. Their senses can detect the faintest rhythms of human footsteps across kilometers of sand. But perhaps most astonishingly, they do not seem to die of old age. No natural predator exists for them. They are immune to hunger, adapted to drought, and endlessly patient. Unless killed by force or by extreme environmental shifts, a sandworm can live for centuries, maybe longer. This is the creature that begins life as a simple organism no larger than a human hand, a being with no brain, no bone, no voice. And yet, over time, it becomes a living mountain, worshipped by some, feared by others, and holding within its body the power to shape the fate of empires. And when it finally dies, whether by battle, age, or accident, its body does not decay like any normal animal. It releases compounds, dissolves into the sand, and begins the cycle again. The Sandtrout return, the desert hardens, the pressure builds, and spice is born. This is not just biology. It is a planetary system, a closed loop of creation and destruction. The desert breathes through the worm, and the worm is Arrakis. To understand the spice, you have to understand the Sandtrout. These creatures are small, nearly mindless, and yet their behavior shapes the entire planet. The Sandtrout, the larval form of the sandworm, are the biological engineers of Arrakis. They're not majestic. They're not even threatening on their own. But their collective behavior transforms the environment in ways that no machine or empire could replicate. Each sandtrout has a singular instinct: find water and trap it. When a sandtrout comes into contact with moisture, it spreads across the liquid surface and hardens. It forms a membrane, sealing the water away from the surface world. This isn't an accident. It's the defining trait of the species. And when thousands of sandtrouts do this together, the result is profound. The water doesn't rise. The air remains dry. The sand remains loose and uncompressed. And over centuries, this process converts entire regions into arid wastelands. Not naturally, but biologically, actively, strategically. This is why Arrakis is a desert planet. Not because of its distance from its sun or a lack of rainfall, but because it has been terraformed from within, not by humans, not by machines, but by the sandtrout. And this manipulation of the climate isn't just destructive. It's essential, because without this living seal, this invisible biological net across the planet, there would be no pre-spice masses. The water would rise. Fermentation wouldn't occur. The spice wouldn't form. The sandtrout don't just protect the conditions for spice production. They are part of the cycle. They create the dryness. They become the worm. They restart the system when the old worm dies. Fremen know this instinctively. To them, the sandtrout are called the water stealers, not as an insult, but as a recognition of their purpose. In a place where water means life, these creatures steal it to build a system far larger, far stranger, and far more sacred. And one man, more than anyone else, understood this. Leto II Atreides. When he begins his transformation into the sandworm, he starts not with the worm, but with the trout. He grafts them onto his body, merges with them, adapts to their instinct. He doesn't just dominate the planet. He becomes part of the biological cycle. The sandtrout, once ignored and unseen, become the foundation of the most radical evolution in human history. Not just a link in the chain, but the first step in becoming something divine. In the world of Dune, everything revolves around one substance, the spice melange. It's not just valuable, it's essential. Spice is the foundation of power, religion, economy, and survival. Without it, the great houses fall, the Spacing Guild collapses, and the Bene Gesserit lose access to their most sacred abilities. But beyond its effects, what truly sets the spice apart is its origin. It doesn't come from a lab or a refinery. It comes from a biological process so complex and dangerous that no faction can ever fully control it. The spice is born in the deserts of Arrakis through a chain of events deeply tied to the life and death of the sandworms. At the heart of this process is what the Fremen call a pre-spice mass. These masses form underground in the dry zones created by the sandtrout. Over time, heat and pressure build up, triggering chemical reactions between worm waste, organic matter, and microscopic life forms. The result is a volatile pocket rich in proto-spice. This pocket remains buried until it's disturbed, most often by the movement of the sandworm. When that happens, the pressure ruptures the ground in what's known as a spice blow. A huge cloud of dust and gas erupts into the air, carrying with it the elements that will soon crystallize into pure melange. It's a rare and unpredictable event. The spice only forms in the aftermath, once the airborne compounds settle back into the sand and react with the dry atmosphere. Timing is everything. If harvesters arrive too late, the wind disperses the spice. If they arrive too early, they risk triggering the blow themselves. And in all cases, the worm is never far behind, because spice blows attract sandworms. Always. The vibrations, the chemical change in the air, the movement on the surface, it all draws them in. That's why every harvesting operation is a race against time. Crews deploy massive harvesting machines supported by spotters and carryalls. The machines collect the spice. Spotters look for signs of worm activity. Carryalls stand by to evacuate the entire operation if a worm is detected. And detection isn't a rare event. It's expected. The worm is the price of doing business. Despite the danger, the rewards are massive. Spice isn't just a stimulant or a luxury item. It extends life, enhances perception, sharpens cognitive abilities, and, in rare individuals, unlocks prescience. Guild navigators rely on massive quantities of spice to perform their roles. By immersing themselves in a controlled environment saturated with spice gas, they're able to perceive future paths and guide interstellar travel safely. Without spice, spaceflight becomes impossible. The Bene Gesserit use melange to enhance their control over body and mind, and to access ancestral memories encoded in their DNA. This is what allows a Reverend Mother to look backward into the past and carry the memories of those who came before her. Every step of their political and genetic strategies is fueled by spice. For the Fremen, spice isn't a rare commodity. It's part of daily life. They consume it in food and drink, inhale it through the air, and absorb it through ritual. It's embedded in their bloodstreams. It shapes their culture, their religion, and even their biology. The deep blue eyes of the Fremen, the eyes of Ibad, are a direct result of chronic spice exposure. On Arrakis, spice is survival. It is identity. It is reverence. And yet, no one truly controls it. Not the Emperor, not the Guild, not the Fremen themselves. Because spice doesn't come from industry. It comes from a hostile, unpredictable environment. Its production depends entirely on the continued existence of the sandworms and the precise ecological conditions they create. You can't replicate that. You can't move it to another world. Every attempt to do so has failed. This creates a profound imbalance in the political structure of the Imperium. The universe is addicted to a substance it can't produce that only one planet provides, and that one species, the sandworm, makes possible. That's the real source of Arrakis' power. Not its people, not its armies, but the fragile and uncontrollable process by which melange comes into existence. What's even more unsettling is that the process is cyclical, and it depends on death. The sandworm moves, the ground ruptures, the pre-spice mass erupts. Later, when the worm dies, its body feeds the soil, and its biological remnants help create the next generation of Sandtrout. The cycle continues. Spice is born, used, hunted, and born again, not by design, but by natural, relentless repetition. In other words, the spice is not a gift. It's a consequence of a brutal environment, an unmanageable ecosystem, and a creature that destroys anything that tries to get too close. To harvest melange is to dance with death, and to accept that all power comes with risk. The only thing more dangerous than a world without spice is the assumption that it will always be there. Sandworms are not just part of the ecosystem on Arrakis. They are the dominant force. Every living creature, every structure, and every human activity that takes place on the desert surface is at the mercy of these massive beings. Their presence is not only constant, but unpredictable. And for most people outside the Fremen culture, their appearance means one thing: death. A fully grown sandworm can reach over 400 meters in length. Its mouth alone is wide enough to swallow vehicles whole. It doesn't need eyes or ears. It navigates the desert by sensing vibrations, detecting the slightest rhythmic disturbance on the surface of the sand. That's why walking normally in the open desert is a death sentence. Repeated steps form a pattern, a rhythm, and rhythm calls the worm. The Fremen understand this better than anyone. That's why they move with irregular footfalls, sliding and stepping in asymmetrical ways to avoid detection. It's not superstition, it's survival. Even small tools or machines dropped on the sand can trigger an investigation from a passing worm. The creature may not know exactly what it's sensing, but its instinct is to respond to any disturbance in its territory. And when it moves fast. For something so massive, the speed of a charging worm is almost unnatural. It can cross kilometers in minutes, displacing entire dunes in its path. Once a worm is on the move, outrunning it is nearly impossible without air extraction. Spice harvesters are particularly vulnerable. They create constant mechanical vibrations, drawing worms from long distances. That's why they're always supported by a carryall, a flying transport vehicle designed to extract the harvester in one piece. If the carryall fails or arrives late, the worm reaches the site. And when it does, it doesn't attack with claws or venom. It simply opens its mouth and consumes. The harvester, its crew, and everything around it are swallowed whole. There are documented cases in which worms have destroyed entire convoys in under a minute. This is not aggression. It's more like a reaction, an immune response from the desert itself. The worm is not evil. It does not hunt out of hatred. It eliminates what does not belong. And on Arrakis, that means almost everything that comes from off-world. But the Fremen have a different relationship with this threat. For them, the worm is not just dangerous, it is sacred. They call it Shai-Hulud, a name that carries both reverence and fear. To them, the worm is not an animal. It is a force, a judge, a god. This belief is not irrational. It's born from generations of living with the creature, understanding its patterns, respecting its domain. Despite the danger, the Fremen have developed techniques not only to avoid the worm but to summon it. They use a device called a thumper, a mechanical instrument that drives a repeating pulse into the ground. The purpose is simple: create a larger rhythmic pattern than any walking human might produce, and use it to draw the worm away from a vulnerable location. But thumpers can also be used to call a worm intentionally, especially when the Fremen want to ride one. More on that later. When a worm approaches, the ground doesn't just shake, it folds. The sand ripples outward, a wave of motion announcing the coming of something impossibly large. Fremen watch for signs in the terrain. Changes in dune patterns, localized tremors, shifts in wind direction. And when the worm finally appears, it's not just seen, it's felt. A towering cylinder of flesh, armored, ancient, rising from beneath with no visible eyes, only a gaping maw lined with concentric rows of crystalline teeth. Most outsiders panic. Some freeze. Few survive their first encounter. The worm does not hesitate. It does not communicate. It does not negotiate. Its response to intrusion is simple: eliminate the source of disturbance. And yet, despite all this, the Fremen do not seek to destroy the worm. They do not view it as a predator to be defeated. Instead, they adapt to its presence. They learn to coexist. And through this coexistence, they find strength. This duality, the worm as both destroyer and sacred entity, defines the psychology of Arrakis. For most of the Imperium, the sandworm is a hazard, something to be avoided or exploited. But for the Fremen, it is something else entirely: a symbol of power, a test of courage, and ultimately, a being that reflects the harsh, unbending truths of the desert itself. The worm is not cruel. It is not kind. It is inevitable. To most outsiders, sandworms are monsters, enormous, dangerous, and uncontrollable. But for the Fremen, they are far more than that. They are divine. They are sacred. They are Shai-Hulud. This name, used with deep reverence, doesn't just refer to the physical creature. It refers to something greater, the eternal force behind the desert, the giver and taker of life, the guardian of balance. Shai-Hulud is not just a sandworm. It is the desert itself. It is time, memory, and judgment. When the Fremen speak of the worm, they're not just describing a species. They are invoking a spiritual presence. The Fremen worldview is inseparable from the sandworm. Their legends, their ethics, and their survival strategies are all tied to it. Children are raised with stories of Shai-Hulud's wisdom and wrath. Adults learn to read the signs of its movement as both a tactical necessity and a spiritual practice. The worm is ever present. It defines the rules of life on Arrakis. To violate those rules is to risk punishment, not from a god in the sky, but from a living force beneath the sand. Ritual plays a central role in this belief. When a Fremen dies, their body is often carried into the deep desert to be consumed by a worm. This act is not seen as destruction, but as reunification. Returning the water of the body to the desert, feeding it to Shai-Hulud, is the ultimate offering. It reinforces the sacred cycle. Life given, life reclaimed, nothing wasted. This ritual is known as the Grand Passage, and it is among the most solemn and meaningful moments in Fremen culture. The Fremen also sing to the worm. Their chants and oral traditions preserve the memory of past encounters, the lessons of old warriors, and the reverence they hold for this being. These songs are not only ceremonial. They are mnemonic, encoding survival knowledge in a spiritual format. Through them, the boundaries between religion, ecology, and strategy dissolve. What's unique in Fremen theology is that their deity is not distant. Shai-Hulud is not an abstract idea or a story passed down through priests. It's real. It has a shape. It appears without warning. It responds to sound. It judges without hesitation. Faith on Arrakis is not a question of believing in the unseen. It's about surviving the known. Shai-Hulud is terrifying because it is present, and revered because it does not discriminate. It destroys the unworthy and spares no one out of pity or favor. This impartiality is part of what makes the worm sacred. It embodies the harsh, absolute logic of the desert. Adapt or die. Respect the balance. Take only what you need. These are not just survival tips. They are moral laws enforced by nature itself. The worm becomes the final arbiter, not just of physical life, but of ethical alignment with the ecosystem. Even the Fremen's language reflects this reverence. They distinguish between Shai-Hulud, the eternal force, and Maker, the term used to describe a sandworm in its physical form. The Maker is a manifestation. Shai-Hulud is the idea, the force that lives through each one. This distinction allows them to navigate both the spiritual and practical dimensions of their environment. There are also taboos. Certain parts of the desert are off-limits during specific times, especially when worm activity is high. Making rhythmic noise without purpose is forbidden. Leaving metal waste in the sand is seen as both disrespectful and suicidal. All of these rules come from hard-earned experience, but over time, they've been encoded into a spiritual framework that shapes every aspect of Fremen life. For the rest of the Imperium, these beliefs are difficult to understand. To the Sardaukar, the worm is an obstacle. To the Guild, it's a production mechanism. To the Harkonnens, it's a nuisance. But to the Fremen, it's the heart of their identity. Their connection to Shai-Hulud gives them not only purpose, but unity. It creates a culture built not on conquest or exploitation, but on coexistence with something vastly more powerful than themselves. This reverence also gives the Fremen strength that others lack. When they ride the worm, they're not dominating a beast. They are entering a pact. They do so with preparation, with prayer, and with full awareness of the risk. The act is both practical and sacred. It's a demonstration of harmony with the natural order, an order that others fear, but which the Fremen have learned to respect and even embrace. In this way, Shai-Hulud is more than a god. It is the desert's memory. It is the story of every Fremen who lived and died in the sand. It is a reminder that survival on Arrakis is never guaranteed, and that reverence is not weakness, but a strategy for life. One of the most iconic images associated with the Fremen is the act of riding a sandworm, a creature hundreds of meters long, powerful enough to tear through machinery and swallow men whole. For outsiders, this seems like madness. For the Fremen, it is a skill, a tradition, and above all, a necessity. The Fremen do not tame the worm. They do not train it. They engage with it through understanding and timing. Riding the Maker is not an act of control. It is a dance with nature at its most dangerous. And it begins with a deliberate call. To attract a worm, a Fremen uses a thumper. Once activated, it sends rhythmic pulses into the sand, drawing the attention of a nearby sandworm. The goal is to create a consistent, strong vibration that the worm will interpret as a disturbance worth investigating. Once the worm is on approach, the Fremen move quickly. This is the moment of greatest risk. Timing, coordination, and calm are essential. As the worm breaks the surface, two Fremen equipped with special hooks, called Maker hooks, move into position on either side of the emerging segment. These hooks do not penetrate the worm's skin. Instead, they are inserted between the segments of the worm's body, where the armored plates shift slightly during motion. This small contact causes the worm to reflexively rotate, keeping the exposed segment away from the sensation. In doing so, it turns and keeps turning, eventually forming a stable horizontal path along the sand. Once the worm stabilizes, other Fremen climb onto its back using ropes and sand brakes. They move with precision and speed. The surface of the worm is not smooth. It shifts and pulses, and without proper balance, a rider can be thrown. But with training and experience, the Fremen can position themselves along the ridges, forming a caravan capable of traversing the desert faster than any vehicle. This technique serves both ritual and practical functions. For young Fremen, riding a worm is a rite of passage, a demonstration of bravery, competence, and readiness to serve the tribe. A boy who rides his first worm is no longer a child. He is a warrior. For experienced fighters, the worm provides mobility across vast distances, allowing the Fremen to appear and disappear in the desert with terrifying efficiency. Even the Sardaukar, elite soldiers of the Emperor, could not match the Fremen's command of the terrain, and much of that advantage came from their ability to ride. Tactically, the worm is more than transportation. It is a message. To see Fremen approaching on the back of a worm is to witness an army that moves in harmony with the deadliest force on the planet. No machine, no army, no vehicle can replicate that level of symbolic and literal power. In the desert, it's the ultimate form of supremacy, not technological, but ecological. This practice is also closely linked to their spiritual beliefs. The act of riding is not seen as disrespect towards Shai-Hulud. Quite the opposite. It's a form of communion, a moment where the rider and the desert become one. The Fremen do not attempt to control the worm permanently. Once the journey is complete, the riders dismount and the worm is released. It continues on its path, untouched and unbound. There are no reins, no cages, no domestication. Only mutual recognition. To an outsider, it might look like a miracle, but to the Fremen, it is the result of discipline, ancestral knowledge, and deep respect. Not every Fremen rides. Not every ride succeeds. Some end in failure, even death. But those who succeed carry the memory of that ride for the rest of their lives. This method of movement also leaves no trace. Unlike vehicles that leave tracks, smoke, or sound, a worm rider disappears into the dunes. This gives the Fremen an enormous tactical advantage. They can strike, vanish, relocate, and resupply without detection. For the Harkonnens, this was a nightmare. For Paul Atreides, it was an opportunity. When Paul became Muad'Dib, he embraced this tradition fully. He didn't just ride the worm. He used it as a symbol of his legitimacy. The fact that he, a son of a noble house, could stand atop Shai-Hulud and lead his warriors was a message not just to the Fremen, but to the entire Imperium. He had become one of them. The worm had accepted him. In the end, to ride the worm is not about domination. It's about alignment. The Fremen do not seek to conquer Arrakis by force. They survive by listening to it, learning from it, and moving with it. Riding the sandworm is the clearest expression of that philosophy, a moment where man and nature act in concert, in silence, across an endless sea of sand. Outside of Fremen society, the sandworm is rarely seen as sacred. In the eyes of the Empire, it is either a nuisance or an asset, something to avoid, to manipulate, or, in the most ambitious projects, to exploit. This perspective has shaped centuries of failed attempts to control not only the spice, but the creature that produces it. For the imperial bureaucracy, the worm is an obstacle to efficient production. Harvesters are destroyed. Crews go missing. Transport costs skyrocket due to the constant need for emergency evacuations. From this angle, the worm is a technical problem, something that interrupts extraction, damages infrastructure, and requires expensive countermeasures. The solution, ideally, would be to neutralize the threat, kill the worm, repel it, or force it to stay away. But none of these options have ever worked. Some factions tried using sonic emitters to redirect worm movement. Others considered armor-piercing weapons to kill them outright. Every approach failed. The sandworm's size, speed, and biological resistance make it nearly impossible to stop once it's on the move. Its skin deflects most weapons. Its movement under the sand makes targeting difficult. And even when a worm is destroyed, a rare feat, the consequences are often worse. The death of a worm disrupts the spice cycle. Its body must be absorbed and transformed before another generation of Sandtrout can re-establish balance. Kill too many worms, and the flow of spice dries up. The Spacing Guild is perhaps the most conflicted. They are entirely dependent on the spice to fuel their navigators, and yet they have no way to influence or stabilize its supply. The worms, and by extension the Fremen, hold the keys to their survival. The Guild's solution has been to maintain a delicate status quo. They don't interfere, they don't provoke. Instead, they use economic pressure to secure consistent spice shipments, hoping the native system continues to function, even if they don't understand how or why it does. Then there are the industrial houses, like House Harkonnen, who see the worm as part of the cost of doing business. Their approach is brutality and volume. Lose a harvester, replace it. Lose workers, recruit more. No respect, no adaptation, just overwhelming force and resource replacement. But this method is unsustainable. The Fremen resist. The desert consumes. The worms keep coming. And every attempt to industrialize spice harvesting at scale collapses under its own inefficiency. What none of these groups truly grasp is that the worm is not just a barrier to access. It is the condition for existence. Without the worm, there's no spice. Without spice, there is no guild, no emperor, no imperium. And without a functioning ecosystem on Arrakis, the worm itself disappears. Attempts to move the worm to other planets have all failed. Even when the environmental conditions were replicated, aridity, sand, temperature, the cycle broke. The worm did not survive, and the spice did not form. That's because the worm is not just a biological entity. It is part of a tightly interwoven planetary system. The Sandtrout, the dry zones, the pre-spice mass, the blow, the harvest, the death of the worm, it's all one loop. Disrupt one link, and the rest collapses. This ecological truth is something the Fremen have always understood. But the Empire, obsessed with domination, refuses to accept it. They want control without understanding. Extraction without responsibility. Resource without respect. And the desert does not tolerate that. Arrakis is not a mine. It is a living system. The worm is not a product. It is a regulator. Ironically, the more the Empire pushes to extract spice through brute force, the more it endangers the very system it depends on. By refusing to listen, it puts everything at risk. And when Paul Atreides takes control of Arrakis, this becomes clear. The moment he seizes the spice production centers and threatens to destroy the ecosystem, the Empire folds. Because in the end, they know the truth. The worm is not just a hazard. It is the backbone of their civilization. And without it, they have nothing. The sandworm represents more than power. It represents permanence. It embodies a scale of time, resilience, and balance that no human institution can match. And Leto II Atreides understood that. He didn't just respect the worm. He chose to become it. Leto II, son of Paul Atreides, took a path that no one else dared to consider. Where Paul saw visions of jihad and collapse, Leto saw a single solution: transformation. He believed that to protect humanity from its own short-sightedness, he had to create a force strong enough to shape the future across thousands of years. That force would not be political. It would not be technological. It would be biological. The first step of his metamorphosis began with the Sandtrout. Leto deliberately allowed his body to be colonized by the larval form of the sandworm. The Sandtrout enveloped his flesh, forming a living skin that grew thicker and more integrated over time. As the years passed, his body changed. His physiology adapted. He became stronger, faster, and more durable, but also less human. His senses expanded, his emotions dulled, and his lifespan extended beyond natural limits. Eventually, Leto II ceased to be a man in any functional sense. He became the god Emperor, a creature with the mind of a human, the body of a worm, and a lifespan measured in millennia. This transformation was not an accident, nor was it for personal gain. It was a calculated move to implement what he called the Golden Path, a long-term plan to ensure humanity's survival by preventing stagnation, tyranny, and extinction. As the God Emperor, Leto ruled with absolute authority for over 3,500 years. He eliminated war. He centralized spice production. He broke the power of the noble houses and the Bene Gesserit. He created a long, enforced peace known as the Letoic era. But this peace came at a cost. His rule was total, his will unchallenged. Most of the population saw him as a tyrant, a monster, or a god, depending on their perspective. His physical form reinforced that perception. Leto's body became massive, almost entirely non-human. Only a small portion of his face and brain remained recognizable. The rest was encased in layers of protective tissue, resistant to conventional weapons and virtually indestructible. He no longer walked. He moved like a worm, gliding through specially designed chambers and roadways. Symbolically, Leto II embodied the sandworm's paradox, destructive and generative at the same time. He suppressed freedom, but guaranteed survival. He hoarded the spice, but ensured its continuity. He ruled with fear, but gave humanity the time and space to evolve. He also reshaped the religion surrounding Shai-Hulud. No longer just a divine force of the desert, the worm became a visible, present god, one who could speak, command, and judge. The Fremen mythology evolved accordingly. What had once been an abstract faith tied to nature became a structured religion centered on a living deity. For many, this was blasphemy. For others, it was fulfillment. But Leto knew that his reign could not last forever. His plan required his eventual death. He believed that by concentrating power into his own monstrous body for thousands of years, he would create a vacuum so vast that when he died, it would force humanity to scatter, adapt, and grow in unpredictable directions. This event, known as the scattering, would become a turning point in human history, breaking the old patterns and creating the possibility for true freedom. In his final moments, Leto's body broke apart. From the fragments of his flesh, new Sandtrout emerged, the foundation for a renewed worm population on Arrakis. His death was not just the end of a reign. It was the rebirth of a cycle. The worms returned, the spice flowed again, and the world moved on, reshaped by the vision of one being who dared to merge with the planet itself. Leto II did not become a god to be worshipped. He became a worm to be remembered. From the smallest Sandtrout to the god Emperor himself, the life cycle of the worm defines everything on Arrakis. It shapes the planet's ecology, its economy, its spiritual systems, and its political destiny. There is no aspect of Dune, no character, no faction, no vision of the future that exists outside the shadow of Shai-Hulud. The sandworm is more than a creature. It is a force of nature. It is a god. It is an ecosystem, and is a mirror, To the Empire, it represents danger and opportunity. To the Guild, dependence and fear. To the Fremen, it is life itself. For Paul Atreides, it is a symbol of prophecy and power. For Leto II, it is a path to immortality, transformation, and sacrifice. Through the worm, each sees something different, and each is changed by it. What makes the worm so central is not just its scale or power, but its role as a bridge between natural law and human ambition. The spice it creates fuels visions, politics, and survival. But its cycle cannot be controlled. It demands adaptation, respect, balance. In a universe built on control, the worm is the great exception. It cannot be bred. It cannot be manufactured. It cannot be conquered. It can only be understood, and only by those willing to listen to the desert. That's what makes the Fremen unique. They don't fight the worm. They live with it. They learn its rhythms. They treat it not as an enemy or a tool, but as a truth. Their way of life is a response to the most powerful force on their world, not in defiance, but in alignment. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson of Dune. That true strength does not come from domination, but from integration. That survival isn't about defeating nature, but becoming part of it. The worm destroys those who do not respect it. But to those who do, it offers vision, meaning, and power. In the end, the worm is time. It is death and rebirth. It is silence and movement. It is destruction and creation. It is what was, and what will be. Thank you for watching. Tell us what you think about the role of the sandworm in Dune. Do you see it as a god, a monster, or something else entirely? If you enjoyed this deep exploration of the Shai-Hulud, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more long-form lore about the Dune universe. The spice must flow.